Recently, I decided to go back and restart The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt because it's just one of the best open world RPGs I've ever played, and also because it got all those upgrades in late 2022. Plus, I started reading the books a couple months ago, and that's just the perfect excuse to revisit the games because you just have so much more context. It really fills in the gaps of my imagination when I'm reading the books and I'm playing the game, and I've also seen some of the Netflix show. So I just want to talk about why The Witcher 3 remains just like at the tippy top of the open world RPG list for me. This video is sponsored by Infinite Borders, the world's first season-based strategy game set in ancient China. Set during the Han Dynasty's Three Kingdoms period, you'll craft your own history as you command legendary heroes to conquer land and defeat enemies. With over 300 different combinations of heroes, skills, and armies, the game offers conflicts inspired by ancient Eastern battlefields. But in Infinite Borders, you're not alone. Build alliances with up to 200 other players and compete with up to 2,000 players on the same regional server. Thanks to its unique art style and presentation influenced by Chinese culture, this game delivers a unique spin on the Three Kingdoms era. Prepare to explore a massive sandbox world full of beautiful mountain ranges, majestic rivers, and treasure-rich valleys. With over 2.5 million tiles to conquer, this map is unparalleled in terms of size and immersion. What makes Infinite Borders truly unique is its nearly 20 seasons, each featuring different storylines, gameplay rules, and world conditions. On August 16th, the new Conquest season, Decisive Battle of Yiling, officially begins, introducing a brand new Highland terrain type and the fire attack tactic, which dramatically changes the gameplay. Remember to burn the wooden palisade camp and compete for the championship. The stakes have never been higher. Download Infinite Borders today by clicking the link in the description and pinned comment. Above all, I think if you don't have good source material to draw from, then you really don't have anything. It's hard to make a game interesting, a fantasy game like this, if you don't have rock solid mythology and all of the world building in place, and The Witcher absolutely has that. It's just so fascinating to exist in this world. All of the political intrigue between the various factions, vying for land, the war that's going on with Nilfgaard, the mythology behind all of the monsters, and what it means to be a Witcher. There's just so many interesting stories to be told in this very dangerous world that it just feels like CD Projekt Red were able to craft such unique, interesting storylines by drawing from all of this. As I'm reading more of the books and getting deeper into The Witcher 3, I feel like I know Geralt more than I ever have before. I feel like I understand the way he thinks and why he acts the way he does. And you just don't get that kind of connection to a main protagonist in a lot of games. Geralt is such a unique character, and even, some of the decisions that CD Projekt Red lets you make might not seem exactly like something Geralt would do, but at the same time, you read stories in the books where, okay, Geralt has a softer side, he does this, or he has a harsher, colder side, and he does this. So it is believable within the context of this universe to make those choices. Maybe not all of them, but that's the point of a video game, right? And they decided to give, the player a little bit of agency, a little bit of choice for this character that is pretty much set in stone if you're reading from the books. Another thing The Witcher 3 just nails from the books is the tone. Tonally, the game and the world is so spot on. It's so unforgiving. It's this dark fantasy, medieval adjacent, setting. Most people, unless you're, nobility, they are not living well. They're scraping by. I mean, the villages that you come across in Velen are just absolutely brutal. And so I think that and Geralt coming through and interacting with these people, it just plays off of itself so well. And this world is dangerous and there's monsters, and the fact that Geralt is the one who can come through and save the day, but his reality is just so harsh, and that mirrors the world itself. It's just really, really smart and clever, and the game understands that. The game is also, while it is an open world RPG in the vein of many that we've seen over the past couple decades, it completely builds itself around what Geralt, the Witcher, would be doing. It's all about doing contracts, and haggling and having to deal with political intrigue, but also having his own personal pursuits running alongside, side and getting into little misadventures with Dandelion and his other, associates. Every system in this game is specifically purpose built for you to live in his shoes. And I think that's so important, and that's also what gets lost in other open world games. I think games these days can feel a little contrived and boxed in by whatever genre they're in. Open world RPG, for example, has to have these side quests and this leveling system and so on and so forth. I think The Witcher 3's approach to all of that just is in perfect alignment with the source material, and it just makes sense, right? It makes sense that there's an alchemy menu. It makes sense that Geralt can apply blade oils because that's what Witchers do. It makes sense that he can upgrade his signs and use mutagens in order to craft a specific loadout to take out a monster. It makes sense that there's a bestiary that you can refer to every time you come across a new enemy, or you just want to clarify, oh, this is what's going to work. This sign is going to work against this monster. This blade oil will work against this monster. It all just works. You know what I mean? It's got a really strong sense of cohesion between everything in the game, and that's why I think it's just such a pleasure to play. There's very little friction. Just what you're playing, it makes sense, and you just play it, and it's great. The next thing I want to touch on is this world design, because I think CDPR really made something special here in terms of the color palette and the density, and how this world feels very big, but not too big, not in an overwhelming way. I know it probably feels like I bash on AC Valhalla whenever I get the chance, but I think it's the perfect comparison because they're going for very similar sort of vibes and what it feels like to travel through these worlds. Both games are very pretty, but Valhalla is just massive. It is way too big to the point that you're not going to remember anything, really. There's no significant landmarks. You're fast traveling as much as you possibly can. The color palette is, while it can be pretty, it for the most part is very dreary and dull and drab, and it's just kind of rough to look at least in my opinion, after a long time. Contrast that with The Witcher. You have some very bright colors, and granted, The Witcher is based in a more fantastical world, so it sort of makes more sense, but it's just more interesting to be in this world, to go through these swamps. It's more dense, I've noticed as well, even though it's still a fairly big world. You're going through some dense forests and swamps. The cities in particular, there is a level of detail and density in the cities and people just existing in this world that, feels realistic. It feels like, yeah, this is exactly how Novigrad would be. You contrast that with Valhalla, where the cities feel very sparse and there's barely anyone walking around, and it's like a 4-square block city, and that's it. CDPR demonstrates a very clear understanding of scope and scale, and also I feel, the general game feel as you're moving through the world in The Witcher 3. And I know it's a small thing, but I think it really does matter that you can't fast travel from absolutely anywhere on the map. You have to visit a hitching post in order to get to another hitching post if you want to fast travel. It's like the smallest, tiniest concession, but I think it makes a lot of sense, just making the player take that extra step if they want to fast travel. And it makes sense why they kept that same system in Cyberpunk 2077, right? You have to go to a fast travel station to get to another one. It's the tiniest, subtlest reminder that you exist in this world, and so you have to make a little bit of an effort to get around it. The next thing I absolutely love about this game is the combat, and this time around I decided to play on hard, so it's not Death March, it's not the completely ridiculous one, but it really was tough in the beginning. It's like most other open world RPGs where when you don't have a lot of skills or a lot of good weapons or a lot of health, it's at its hardest, but once you hit a certain threshold, then you're able to kind of steamroll enemies and it's not that bad. The first time I played The Witcher 3, I thought the combat was unreasonably difficult, and I think it's because I didn't really understand what it was trying to get me to do. I wasn't parrying, I was just dodging absolutely everything, and I also wasn't paying enough attention to the bestiary and the different signs and oils that I should be using. When you play on higher difficulties above normal in this game, it sort of necessitates that you use every single part of the game, that you are going to craft, a bit of a loadout to handle whatever's in front of you. And again, that's just in lockstep with the source material. That is what a Witcher does, right? But what's really enhanced my experience this time around is the quick casting. And this is a new feature from the late 2022 update where you can just hold down the trigger and then press a face button in order to cast any of the signs. Before that, I would pick a single sign and then most likely use that one sign throughout a fight, or if I needed to switch to Quen because I was getting, my butt handed to me, then I would do that. Now I'm using Yurden and Ard and Igni and Quen pretty much in every single fight that I'm in, and that's because of this accessibility option. It's just so much easier to get access to all of these. While I did say that it starts off, harder and gets easier when you're on harder difficulties, I still haven't hit that point where the game feels easy. That's another thing that I really like about how this combat feels, is it's not super forgiving. It all depends on what you're fighting. I mean, using your steel sword, for the most part, you're able to stagger opponents if you land hits, but once you switch to the silver for monsters, it's a different game. You have to dodge out of the way. You have to, employ different tactics for what you're fighting. And I think there's kind of the beauty and the simplicity in this game. There's not a ton of bells and whistles that you can do. You've got your fast attack, your strong attack, bombs, your ranged attack, and your signs, and you can dodge and parry, and that's about it. I think a lot of open world RPGs think that they need to be more complex in order to be satisfying. In this game, it's more about just refining what you're doing, making sure you're using the right tactic, but once you figure it out, it's about executing, and the fun is, seeing if you can actually pull it off. Another aspect that I always look for in open world games is facial animation and voice acting, because if those things aren't right, it sort of brings me out of the experience. And it's crazy when you look at how many games have come out in the last decade that don't quite stack up to games that came out in the previous decade in terms of how they look. We've reached this weird point where characters are looking more realistic, but their facial animation is not. So it's almost like it hasn't quite caught up with the visual fidelity of what they're putting out. The Witcher 3, I think, strikes a perfect balance between art direction that looks good enough for these faces and character models and facial animation that feels hand-touched enough to the point that you're like, yeah, a human worked on this scene and directed it, and it feels appropriately realistic, it's got emotional weight to it, and everyone looks the way they should. And for a game of this size, that is not an easy feat. I mean, again, we're going to go back to the comparison earlier with Assassin's Creed Valhalla. The faces in that game don't look as good as the faces in The Witcher 3, and Valhalla came out 5 years afterwards. And so I think you could make that comparison with many games that have come out in the last 5 years. The main story cutscenes in particular are very strong, I think, in The Witcher 3. You can tell that they went back and put some more hand-touched feel into those and, man hours and effort. But even the side quests, I can pull up a random side quest talking to a random NPC that I will never see again and be blown away by what I'm seeing in terms of, this game, again, was made almost 10 years ago. It's truly impressive. And that's another huge pillar of why this remains such a great game. It's something that you can pull up, play 1 or 2 side quests if you only have 30 minutes to spare, and be genuinely impressed with what you've seen, what you've played, and you'll take something away from it, right? It's not just a throwaway little side quest. You're going to remember something about that because of the memorable writing, the animations, the scene that comes together. It's really good. Speaking of, we need to talk about writing. I think this has some of the best writing in an open world video game that I've ever played. I do this for a living, so I play a lot of games, and let me tell you, I get very bored very quickly during cutscenes if the writing is not good, if it's not holding my attention. And The Witcher 3 is incredible in that respect. There's so many little tiny stories that you can find that will legitimately stick with you. And I think what's made me appreciate the writing even more is going back to the books and reading the source material, because number one, like I said, it really is in lockstep. It's very faithful. But number two, it is, I think, equally as impressive in the games. Geralt especially is such an interesting character. I sort of mentioned the fact that he's got to deal with all these people who are telling him he doesn't have any emotions, but what he thinks he feels are emotions, and he expresses those, but at the same time, he can't really express them because he's got to do his job and earn his living. And then he is entangled, of course, with, his destiny and Yennefer and, all of these different things pulling and tugging at him. At the same time, he has that very warm side to him too, and you get to see that in the games. He's also funny. Like, he cracks jokes and says things that are legitimately making me laugh while I'm playing the game. It's so difficult to pull off good writing in an open world video game. Just the volume of scenes and lines and dialogue that has to be delivered and keep people's attention. The Witcher 3 also can be played non-linearly. I mean, you do have the main story, but all of the side content too, it has to make sense that Geralt can approach this stuff in, whatever order that he wants to. It's a testament to really good writing, I think, that they're able to pull this off, that you're able to play this game in whatever order that you want, and logically it all makes sense. It still has weight and impact no matter what level you're doing certain pieces of content at. It's just solid. I spent this whole time praising The Witcher 3, but there are a few things that I've bumped on that have sort of bothered me, and of course, no game is perfect, The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt included. No matter how great I think it is, it's got some things that I don't love. What's been bothering me the most is the way that loot is rolled out in the open world. It feels like no matter what level I am, I'm never finding loot that matches my level. It's either way too high or way too low. It's almost never an upgrade. I'm always disappointed. I'm always picking up loot and I'm like, oh, okay, I can't use that. Oh, it's too high. Oh, it's too low. It's never tuned to my level. And what makes that doubly frustrating is that the level gating is pretty severe in this game. What I mean is you feel underpowered if your gear is not at the same level that Geralt is at. Whether it's your weapons or your armor, you're gonna get crushed by your enemies. So you always have to make sure your gear is up to snuff. And traditionally in this kind of game, you would expect to find upgrades to gear while you're looting things out in the world, whether it's treasure chests or getting rewards from quests. For the most part, in my, probably dozen hours so far revisiting the game, that just doesn't exist. The only way that I can compete is to use diagrams and craft that stuff in order to keep up. Now, it's fine that there's a workaround, but that sort of undermines the whole idea behind looting. I've found myself sometimes just being like, should I even loot? Is it even worth it? I'm not even gonna find stuff that's gonna give me an upgrade. But hey, after this much time with the game, if that's the only fault I can find in it, I think I'm having a really good time. And that's absolutely the truth, because once again, for all the reasons I said in this video, I think The Witcher 3 is just one of the very best open world games I've ever played. I'm loving it. I can't wait to continue playing it after I record this video. Before we wrap, I know this is a different kind of video that you all are probably not used to seeing on my channel, maybe in the past, but certainly not in the last several years. We usually do the live commentary where I make some jokes, I cut together the best moments, and then give you guys a video. Lately, the experience for me, at least recording that content, has felt a little hollow. Like, I'm just rushing through to finish recording the video, to edit it and get it out, and I feel like there's passion that's missing behind that. So what I'm trying to do here is mix things up. So I guess I'm just asking you guys what you think, and if you're enjoying it, I'd love to hear it. Either way, thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you did enjoy it, remember to hit that like button. I'd appreciate it. Also, subscribe to the channel for more videos like this, and ring the bell so you don't miss my next one. Thanks guys again for watching, and I'll talk to you next time.